The moment Preston said, "Let's pivot to a safety-forward optimization paradigm here," I swear I felt something snap in my brain. It wasn't just the phrase, though if corporate buzzwords could be weaponized, that one would level a city block. It was the fact he was saying it to Patricia Wells, the VP of Procurement from Midwest Automotive Consortium, a woman who'd spent 30 years in manufacturing and could spot BS from 3 time zones away. Patricia blinked once, set down her coffee and said, "What exactly does that mean, Preston?" And like a lemming sprinting toward a cliff, he kept talking. "I'm Nathan Morrison, by the way. 55 years old, been with Heartland Industrial Solutions for 18 years. Started on the floor back when this place actually made things instead of just managing other people who made things. Worked my way up to Senior Operations Director through 3 different ownership changes, 2 recessions, and more reorganizations than I care to count. Preston Thompson is our Junior VP of Operations. Also happens to be the CFO's son, but I'm sure that's just a coincidence, right? This wasn't Preston's first disaster with clients. 2 months ago, he'd assured a major automotive supplier that our new automated systems could handle double their rated capacity. I spent that entire weekend calling every subcontractor I knew, pulling in favors built over nearly 2 decades, just to avoid a catastrophic failure. Preston was at a networking event posting LinkedIn updates about disruptive innovation while I was explaining physics to very angry engineers. But this time was different. This was Patricia Wells, and our contract with Midwest Automotive wasn't just big money. It was the foundation that kept 200 people employed and our doors open. Preston didn't just step in it this time. He dove in headfirst with Olympic-level commitment. 15 minutes later, after blaming our quality control team for legacy thinking, misquoting our safety certification timelines, and promising delivery schedules we'd never discussed, Preston wrapped up with a confident nod and called it synergistic alignment. Patricia's face had gone through more expressions than a poker player trying not to laugh at a terrible bluff. He spun his chair toward me with the smugness of a guy who just told his wife her cooking reminded him of his mother's, and thought it was a compliment. "Handled," he said, then walked out. No follow-up, no notes, no acknowledgement that he'd just set a $127 million contract on fire and handed me the extinguisher. Just strolled out like a teenager who microwaved aluminum foil and figured someone else would deal with the sparks. Patricia looked at me with the expression of someone who'd just watched a train derail in slow motion. "Nathan," she said quietly, "can we talk?" The next 4 hours were a masterclass in damage control. I walked Patricia through our actual safety protocols, clarified our delivery capabilities without throwing Prince Privilege under the bus, and somehow managed to convince her that one person's ignorance didn't represent the entire company's competence. The whole time I could see her taking mental notes, probably updating her internal risk assessment about whether Heartland was still a reliable partner. It's not that I minded fixing problems. Hell, that's what they paid me for. But there's a difference between solving legitimate challenges and constantly mopping up after someone who treated a $127 million account like his personal sandbox. The worst part wasn't Preston's incompetence. Incompetent people can learn if they want to. The worst part was watching him fail upward, while the people who actually knew what they were doing got pushed aside to make room for his leadership development. By 7:30 p.m., after I'd sent the last follow-up email and finally shut my laptop, my phone buzzed. Text from Patricia herself. "Thanks for the real talk, Nathan. You're why we're staying." I read it twice, then screenshot it. Not out of ego, but because I had a feeling I'd need proof someday that someone around here actually valued competence over connections. That's the thing about this business. You keep your head down, do the work, fix what gets broken, and once in a while someone notices. Doesn't change your title or your paycheck, but it keeps you going. Like decent coffee on a Monday morning, not glamorous, but it gets the job done. My wife Linda always said I was too loyal for my own good, that I should have jumped ship years ago when the headhunters started calling. Maybe she was right, but I'd helped build this place from 50 employees to 300. These weren't just jobs on a spreadsheet to me. They were mortgages and college funds and retirement plans for people I'd worked alongside for nearly 2 decades. Walking through the production floor the next morning, I could see the ripple effects of yesterday's near disaster. Tommy Rodriguez was double-checking quality specs on the Miller account, probably wondering if his job would survive another round of Preston's innovative thinking. Maria Santos was training 2 new hires on safety protocols, protocols I'd helped write after a near-miss incident 5 years ago that Preston probably didn't even know about. These people trusted me to protect their livelihoods, and I'd been doing it by being the adult in the room while Prince Privilege played executive. That morning, I forwarded Patricia's message to my direct supervisor, not Preston, not his dad, but the actual person I reported to operationally. Just wanted someone in leadership to see that our biggest client wasn't planning to bolt while the golden boy was playing dress-up executive. No response came back, which was standard procedure around here. You only hear from management when something's wrong, and sure enough, at 11:45 a.m., I got a Slack message from Preston. Just a thumbs-up emoji, and Dad wants to see you in his office, like we were heading to a family barbecue instead of... What I already knew was a fresh serving of corporate theater with me as the main course. I grabbed my notepad and walked down the hall, passing the same motivational posters that had been hanging there since the Clinton administration. Charles Thompson, our CFO, was sitting behind his desk like he'd just been personally insulted by the concept of accountability. The office itself was a monument to inherited privilege, mahogany everything, family photos strategically placed to remind visitors that this was a dynasty, not just a business. Preston was slouched in the corner chair doing his best wounded puppy impression, probably practicing the same expression he'd used to get out of trouble since kindergarten. "Nathan," Charles said without looking up from whatever document he was pretending to read, "we need to discuss how you handled yesterday's follow-up." I waited. In my experience, when someone starts a conversation by telling you what you need to discuss, they've already decided how it's going to end. You embarrassed my son in front of a major client. There it was. Not a performance conversation, not a process review, not even a discussion about how to prevent future miscommunications. This was Daddy doing damage control for Junior's bruised ego. Charles had always been protective of Preston, but it had gotten worse since his wife Martha passed 2 years ago. Preston was his legacy now, the living proof that the Thompson name meant something in this industry. The family photos on his desk told the story. Martha at company picnics, Preston's graduation from business school, 3 generations of Thompsons at various industry awards ceremonies. Never mind that Preston couldn't tell the difference between a safety protocol and a lunch menu. Never mind that every project he touched required emergency intervention. The kid was going to run this company someday, and Charles would bend reality itself to make that happen. "You undermined his authority," Charles continued, finally looking up with the kind of stare that probably worked on junior executives and worried mothers. "Now there's confusion about who's really managing this account. Confusion was corporate speak for the client trusts you more than him, and we can't have that. I'd seen this movie before in other family businesses. Good employees made to look bad so mediocre relatives could look competent by comparison. It's the oldest story in corporate America. Competence as a threat to nepotism." Preston shifted in his chair, trying to look wounded while barely containing his excitement. This wasn't about business anymore. This was about power, about making sure everyone knew their place in the Thompson family hierarchy. I could see it in his eyes. This wasn't just about the Midwest automotive account. This was his chance to finally put the old-timer in his place, to show everyone that Daddy's protection meant more than experience. "Here's what's going to happen," Charles said, leaning back like a judge, delivering a sentence. "At Friday's board meeting, you're going to clarify the reporting structure. You're going to acknowledge that Preston leads this account." Preston perked up like a dog hearing the treat bag, his wounded expression replaced by barely contained glee. "Nothing dramatic," Charles added, probably thinking he was being magnanimous. "Just make it clear who's in charge." I could have fought it, could have explained the situation, defended my actions, dragged HR into this circus and made everyone pick sides, could have pulled up Patricia's email, shown them the client feedback, demanded they explain how preserving a $127 million relationship was somehow insubordination. But I didn't. Experience had taught me that when someone's mind is made up, facts just become obstacles to remove. Instead, I just nodded. Understood. The word came out calm, professional, giving away nothing of what was actually running through my mind. Then I stood up. "Anything else?" Charles blinked, probably expecting more resistance, more pleading, maybe even some gratitude for his generous solution. "No, that's all." I walked out calm as could be because, while they were playing checkers with nepotism and ego, I'd already positioned my queen 8 months ago. Back in my office, I sat in the same chair I'd occupied for 12 years, looking out at the production floor where I'd started as a line supervisor. The afternoon shift was coming on, workers I'd trained, promoted, fought for during budget cuts. These people trusted me to protect their livelihoods, and I'd been doing it by being the adult in the room while Prince Privilege played executive. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk, pushed aside old performance reviews and training certificates, and pulled out a folder I hadn't touched in months. Labeled Q3 Automotive Protocols in my careful handwriting, boring enough that nobody would bother looking, especially Preston, who treated reading like a communicable disease. Inside were 6 subfolders, including one labeled Contract Provisions, Executed. See, what Preston and his father never bothered to notice because they were too busy comparing whose BMW was shinier was that 8 months ago, during the renewal negotiations with Midwest Automotive, I'd quietly suggested adding a few administrative clauses to protect operational continuity. Charles had signed off without reading them. He was busy planning Preston's promotion track and couldn't be bothered with contract details. The legal department rubber-stamped everything because it looked like standard boilerplate language. Even Patricia's team approved it because it actually made sense from a risk management perspective. But buried in Section 3.4, written in the kind of dry legal language that makes most people's eyes glaze over, was a simple provision. All operational continuity shall remain contingent upon oversight by the named operations executive for continuity purposes. That named executive was me, Nathan Morrison, specifically designated and authorized to maintain operational oversight for the duration of the contract period. I clicked on the PDF, reading it again like a man examining the deed to his house. Signature dated and time-stamped. Legal department countersigned. Patricia's signature right there in digital ink. What it meant, in plain English, was that any significant change to operational leadership required my written authorization and client notification. Not Preston's approval, not Charles's blessing, mine. At the time, it felt like insurance. Protection against exactly the kind of internal politics Preston had now unleashed. But sitting in my office while the evening crew started their shift, it wasn't insurance anymore. It was leverage. They wanted clarity on who was in charge? Fine. They'd get more clarity than they bargained for. I didn't go home and punch walls or drink myself stupid like some middle-aged cliché. Instead, I stopped by Tony's Diner. Same place I'd been getting coffee for 12 years. Same corner booth where I'd celebrated my promotion to operations director. Same view of the parking lot where Linda and I used to meet for lunch when she worked at the credit union down the street. The familiar routine felt oddly comforting. Sometimes, when everything else is falling apart, you need something that stays consistent. Ordered my usual club sandwich and sat in my truck under the streetlight that's been flickering since Obama was president, laptop balanced on my steering wheel. The parking lot was mostly empty except for a few other folks grabbing dinner after long days at jobs that probably didn't appreciate them either. There was something honest about this place. No mahogany furniture, no family dynasty photos, just people doing real work for honest pay. I opened my laptop and pulled up that folder, found the document I'd buried between quarterly reports and safety compliance updates. The clause was right there on page 7, section 3.4, written in language so boring it could cure insomnia. All operational continuity shall remain contingent upon oversight by the named operations executive. Any modification to said designation requires client notification and written reauthorization. Below that, my name in black ink, signed by Charles Thompson, dated 8 months ago when he was too busy planning Preston's next leadership opportunity to read what he was signing. Countersigned by legal because it made business sense. Approved by Patricia's team because they'd been burned before by companies that switched account managers mid-contract without notice. But sitting in that parking lot, with the diner's neon sign casting pink shadows across my laptop screen, it wasn't just a clause anymore. It was a carefully planted seed that had been waiting 8 months to bloom. I opened a new email, fingers steady on the keyboard. This wasn't about revenge, though I'd be lying if I said there wasn't some satisfaction in it. This was about consequences, about showing people that actions have results even when you think you're untouchable because your last name is on the building. Subject line: Operational Continuity, Contract Provision 3.4, 2, legal@heartlandindustrial.com. CC, my personal Gmail account because I wasn't born yesterday. Body text: Per attached provision dated 8 months prior, I remain the named operations executive for Midwest Automotive Consortium Account Continuity. Any alteration to this arrangement triggers Section 4.2 regarding client notification and review protocols. Please advise on procedures following my voluntary separation, effective immediately. Then I opened Word and started typing my resignation letter. 2 paragraphs, professional, no emotion, just facts and a timestamp. Dear Mr. Thompson, please accept this letter as formal notification of my resignation from Heartland Industrial Solutions, effective immediately. After 18 years of service, I have decided to pursue other opportunities. I will ensure all pending matters are properly documented for transition purposes. Sincerely, Nathan Morrison. Short, sweet, and absolutely devastating when combined with the contract clause. I attached both documents to the email, took one last look at everything, and hit send at 10:15 p.m. The message sent notification blinked on my screen like a tiny victory flag. I sat there for another few minutes, listening to the distant hum of traffic and watching a couple of teenagers in the diner booth by the window, probably on their first date, nervous and excited about possibilities. Once upon a time, that had been Linda and me, planning our future over coffee and pie, believing that hard work and loyalty would be enough to build a good life. Maybe it still was, just not at Heartland Industrial Solutions. Drove home to the house Linda and I had bought 15 years ago, mortgage nearly paid off thanks to steady employment and careful budgeting. She was already asleep, but I could see the light under our daughter Sarah's door, probably studying for her engineering finals at Ohio State. Smart kid, smarter than her old man. She'd never have to depend on the whims of family dynasties and corporate politics. Let them think they'd won. Let Charles and Preston high-five over putting the old-timer in his place. Let them celebrate their victory lap around the executive floor tomorrow morning. Because while they were out there polishing each other's egos and congratulating themselves on maintaining proper hierarchy, I'd just pulled the pin on a $127 million account and set it gently on their conference table. Not to explode, not to threaten, just to exist. A quiet little fact, sitting there in their legal department's inbox, waiting patiently for someone to read the fine print and realize what they'd just triggered. Gravity always does its job. You don't have to push things downhill. You just have to step aside and let physics handle the rest. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that makes you glad to be alive, even when you're about to watch a building collapse. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. in the big conference room on the 3rd floor. 2 walls of windows, 1 dying ficus that had somehow survived 3 different CEOs, and a conference table that probably cost more than most people's annual salary. They'd scheduled it under the bland title Q4 Operations Review and Strategic Alignment, corporate speak so vague it could mean anything from free donuts to a hostile takeover. But I knew what it really was. Charles Thompson's coronation ceremony for his son, with me playing the role of defeated opposition, publicly acknowledging the new order. I walked into that conference room 5 minutes early, not because I was eager to be publicly humiliated, but because if you're going to watch a controlled demolition, you might as well get a front row seat. I took a chair near the door, hands folded, face neutral, while the rest of the team filtered in with their tablets and overpriced coffee, blissfully unaware they were about to witness the corporate equivalent of stepping on a landmine. Preston sat near the front, fresh haircut, shirt so crisp it looked like it came with its own zip code. He was whispering with Brad from marketing and Kevin from operations, both of whom had hitched their wagons to his rising star. Every few seconds one would glance my way and smirk like they knew something I didn't. At 10:02 a.m., Charles walked in with the confidence of a man who thought he'd already won the game. Before we dive into quarterly numbers, he announced, I want to address some recent organizational clarity needs. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. We've had some confusion regarding leadership structure on our Midwest Automotive account. It's been addressed internally, but for transparency, I want to formally announce a reporting adjustment. He turned toward me like a prosecutor presenting evidence. Effective immediately, Nathan Morrison will be transitioning away from direct client leadership. Preston will assume full operational oversight moving forward. A pause like he expected applause. The room stayed quiet except for the hum of air conditioning and someone's coffee mug clinking against the table. I felt 12 pairs of eyes flick toward me, waiting to see how the old dog would handle being put out to pasture. But I didn't flinch. Instead, I stood up slowly, straightened my jacket, and walked to the center of the room with the calm deliberation of a man who'd already made his peace with what was coming next. "Understood," I said, voice steady as bedrock. "Thank you for the clarification." Then I smiled. Not the polite corporate smile. The smile of a man who'd already filed the paperwork and lit the fuse, just waiting for the explosion. Charles looked satisfied. Preston shot me a little salute, his smirk wide enough to park a truck in. I tilted my head slightly and smiled again because, "Kid, you didn't just remove me from the project. You removed the only person keeping that $127 million contract from walking out the door." Monday morning, the office opened at 8:30. By 8:45, my absence was the main attraction. Clean desk, dark monitors, my coffee mug gone. In the center sat my security badge, office keys, and a sealed envelope marked Human Resources, Confidential. Preston strolled in 20 minutes late, saw the empty desk, and stopped mid-sip of his iced whatever. His victory smirk faded into something that looked suspiciously like concern. By 9:15, Charles had read my envelope and emerged looking like he'd tasted spoiled milk. But the real fireworks started Tuesday morning at 9:07 a.m. An email hit the operations inbox with a subject line that should have triggered every alarm in the building. Leadership transition. Contract compliance review required. From Patricia Wells, Midwest Automotive Consortium. Patricia didn't do small talk. When she sent emails, it was because something needed fixing immediately. Notice Nathan Morrison no longer listed as operations contact for our account. Please confirm who our new named operations executive is for compliance purposes. Need this resolved before we can proceed with Q1 planning. By 9:30, Kevin from operations replied confidently, "Hi Patricia, Preston Thompson is now handling all operational oversight. He's copied here for coordination." Patricia's response came back at 9:48 a.m. like a precision airstrike. "That won't work. Per our agreement, Section 3.4, operational continuity must be managed by the named operations executive. Preston Thompson is not listed in this provision. Please advise immediately." 4 sentences that sucked the oxygen out of the building. At 10:15, Kevin walked down to legal in person, face pale. By 10:30, James Hartley, our head counsel, was speed-walking down the hallway, clutching a printed contract and his phone, barking into it like it owed him money. He stormed into Charles's office without knocking and slapped the papers on the desk hard enough to make everything jump. "This clause," he said, pointing at page 7 like it was evidence in a murder trial. "You remember this clause?" Charles, who'd been halfway through explaining to another executive how Preston's natural leadership instincts were already showing results, blinked. "What clause?" "Section 3.4, operational continuity designation. It's signed, binding, and Nathan's the only listed executive." Hartley's voice dropped to that dangerous whisper lawyers use when explaining how badly you've screwed up. "He's gone. They can walk." "Did you remove him before reviewing this?" Hartley pressed. Silence. "You violated the continuity provision. They can terminate without penalty." Meanwhile, I was sitting in Tony's diner, same booth, same bottomless coffee, watching the parking lot where I'd once taught my son to parallel park. My phone had been buzzing all morning. Patricia had forwarded me her emails with a simple text. "Thought you should see this." At 11:20 a.m., Patricia sent another email, this time copying Midwest's legal team, risk management, and CFO. "Pending resolution of the named executive designation and contract compliance, we are placing all new work orders on hold. We will resume normal operations once our legal team completes review. Please refrain from project assignments until this matter is clarified." Translation: We're not saying we're pulling the $127 million contract, but we're not saying it either. By noon, the board was in emergency session. By 2 p.m., my phone rang. James Hartley's name on the caller ID. "Nathan, we need to discuss the Midwest situation. Are you available for a conversation?" I looked out the window, watched a guy in coveralls finally defeat the stubborn vending machine, then answered. "I'm listening." "Would you consider a consulting arrangement to help stabilize the client relationship?" I took a sip of coffee, smiled at the satisfaction in his voice turning to desperation. They weren't just asking me to come back, they were begging. "I'll think about it," I said, and hung up. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply step aside and let gravity handle the rest.